traits are the traits of God that you would sort of sum up. Now, I'm just going to... we're having a bit of a break in the sermon series. We finished a little bit of a series on mission, which was brilliant, with John last week. And if you missed that, you just missed it because we didn't record it, so you had to be there. But it was really amazing. And we've been talking about, sort of how do you represent Christianity around the world, and how do you kind of how do we sort of think with a bit of an outward focus? And we're going to have a bit more of an informal sort of August, so we've got a couple of weeks to fill, and I can just choose whatever I wanted to talk about, and so I'm going to talk about God being our Father. And the reason why is because when Jesus teaches the disciples to pray, he teaches them to call him Father, and we're all very used to that idea. So we've been talking about it today, and it just sort of slips past us. But the whole thing about prayer, when Jesus talked about prayer, was just such a radical departure from the way that the Jewish people, his audience, even thought about prayer anyway. And what he taught about prayer was just really weird and totally different. And I think it escapes us a little bit how weird it was. Prayer itself is anyway hard, isn't it? Put your hand up if you think it's a doddle. Prayer, really easy, got it down, all good. Okay, there's a couple of people. That's really good. I think it's really hard. And I'm a church leader, and I'm 58, and I've been praying since I was 2. But I think it's really hard. I do. I think it's hard to get a sense of presence, reality, that that it makes a difference. Personally, I find it really hard to pray for countries. Oh dear, so hard to pray for whole countries. I just don't know if I believe it makes any difference when I pray for a country, but you should and everything. I find it really easy to pray for somebody who's in the room with me, one-to-one. That bit I've got down. Anyway, Einstein, somebody once came to Einstein and said, I want to do a PhD. What is there left to do that would be really good? Everything's been studied. And apparently Einstein said someone should do a PhD on prayer, because he was fascinated with this idea about prayer and how weird and wonderful it was. And he wasn't a believer. He was a Jewish person, but he wasn't a believer in Christianity at all. So anyway, that's where we're going today. We're going to talk about prayer, but specifically our Father, the fact that Jesus said this. Now, the thing I was saying about it's a bit of a weird thing to say. So the Jewish people, their culture, basically their name for God was Yahweh, but it's actually 4 letters called the Tetragrammaton. There's the picture of that. So look at this, go down there. Look at that, this mysterious 4 letters that denote the name of God. It's called the Tetragrammaton, 4 tetra. And it's YHWH. And the thing about it is you're not allowed to say it. His name is so sacred, it mustn't be found on your lips. So they didn't put any vowels in, it's just the YHWH. And when they read it in their scriptures, the name of God, they would say Lord, which isn't what that says. It says Yahweh, but they wouldn't. You can't say the name of God. It mustn't be found on your lips. You're not holy enough or pure enough. And his name is so pure and holy, don't you dare say it out loud. It's that sort of feeling. And it was so, and the God that the Jewish people knew, he is a loving God, but he's complex, multifaceted. He's a lover one minute, a warlord the next. So holy you'll burn up in his presence, don't come near him. But also this kind of compassionate God. And, it's multifaceted, strange, unfamiliar, other, holy, don't you dare say his name on your lips. And so when Jesus taught about prayer and said, say our Father, that would have been so weird, honestly. And it's easy for us to not get a sense of that when we read the Lord's Prayer. But Philip Yancey, one of my favourite authors, said this: it has become so commonplace to speak of God as our Father that we forget what an extraordinary metaphor it once was. And I kind of want to revisit that sort of thing of, what does it actually mean to be able to say, God is my Father? When Jesus said, in John 5, Jesus called God his Father, and it says that the teachers of the law planned to kill him from that moment. Because that, you can't say that in that culture. You need to be got rid of, because how dare you ruin faith by thinking of it in that way. But by the time the New Testament is being written, Paul calls Jesus God, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, totally with ease. Something huge has shifted, and we're in the sort of line of that. Now, what is a father all about? Now, this is a little story from our kids' upbringing. Greg once overheard two of our sons negotiating a deal one morning, and one of them has become a very good businessman, and the signs were showing at that point that he was going to be a good businessman, because he had something, and we can't really remember what it was. He had something that the other one wanted. Now the thing is, he didn't need it anymore, he didn't want it anymore, and the other one knew that, and so he was trying to negotiate, can I have that thing? And basically what Greg overheard was a deal being made between the businessman and his brother, and eventually money was talked about and a price was agreed to buy this toy that was no longer needed. And Greg, I just remember, Greg can't even remember this, by the way, but I just remember Greg, because he shared a little word in Woody's that morning about it. It must have been about 15 years ago. Greg felt God said to him, a father loves giving things to their children, but brothers, it's a different thing. There's a bit of competition going on and a bit of power and everything, but fathers really love, and Greg was thinking, I'd love to give that thing to my son. I would really enjoy that. That would be a pleasure to me. But actually, Greg felt God say to him, aren't you just glad I'm your father, not a brother? That sort of thing, that sort of sense of, it's not like that between you and me. Here's a little quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A child asks of the Father whom he knows. Thus, the essence of Christian prayer is not general adoration, but definite, concrete petition. The right way to approach God is to stretch out our hands and ask of one who we know has the heart of a father. It's a little bit, a couple down. That next down. There. So that's what Bonhoeffer said, that the right way to approach God is to stretch out our hands and ask of the one who we know has the heart of a father. So what kind of God are we praying to? And what kind of God does Jesus encourage us to come to? And we're just going to read the story of the prodigal son, which is probably the most famous parable that Jesus told. And he told it for a very deliberate purpose. He told it to recast Jewish minds about what a father is really like. That's the idea. It's not just about, if you've done something bad, you can always come back and he'll do this. He's trying to repaint the picture of what God is really like when he's telling this story, I think. So here's the prodigal son, very familiar. What's happened before this moment, because it's a long story, is, as we know, father has two sons. One son comes to him and says, give me my inheritance, I want to go and I want to spend money and party. And the father gives him his inheritance, and off he goes. He spends all the money and on partying and prostitutes, and he ends up living in a pigsty, eating pig food, and he comes to his senses and he says, even the servants in my dad's home have got more than I've got. I'm going to go back and grovel. And then this is the next bit of the story. It says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. This is Jesus talking, telling a story. His father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. It's his speech. He thinks he's going to, get him back in there. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. But meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. the older brother, became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." It's a really amazing story, but again, it's so familiar that you can sort of lose the kind of sense of it. But I think Jesus is first of all trying to get our brains to open up to a way of thinking about what God is really like. So here's 3 things that I just want to refresh. Some of you, this is such a refresh because you know this stuff, but we have to keep coming back to these ideas because we lose them. And I think you'll see what I mean. So first of all, you see this, the good Father. So Jesus is saying he's good. Now again, familiar idea. He's a good father. What's a good father to you? Did you have a good father? What was your father like? I mean, for the Jewish people, a good father, this was not a painting, a pen portrait of a good father anyway, because for one thing, he's extremely undignified. He's running out to meet this father. One of the customs of a Jewish village would be if a son had gone away and done something bad and had offended the father, when the son came back, to the village, if they came back with their tail between their legs seeking mercy, what would be a standard practice would be the whole village would come out to meet this person who had done so much wrong and would shame them publicly. And the father would be part of that shaming. So not only would the father reject the son, but also there wouldn't be any mercy from the whole community. And, some theologians say Jesus is trying to depict this idea of the Father running ahead of this judgment that is sure to come, to get there before the village can gather in judgment, running ahead to meet the Son. And it's extremely undignified for a Jewish father to run, but it's not expected. The goodness of this Father is not really expected. So what do you expect when you pray? What kind of God is he? Is he distant or near? Is he kind? Do you think of kindness in the personality of God? Is he happy? That is a good question, I think, because I think that by instinct we can carry this idea that God isn't very happy. It's troublesome running this world. And you are troublesome. You're not quite fitting into the right sort of moulds. And so our sense of approach to God is not a kind of, like Doug was trying to say today, this sort of daddy God at all. What are the templates for Father that you're working with? Because that is really what Jesus is up to. So again, Philip Yancey, another little quote from him. Philip Yancey grew up with no dad. His dad died. He had a terrible case of polio, and he went into one of those iron lungs, And so his last memories of his dad as a little boy was of his dad in an iron lung, which was a terrible thing. Then he died. And it's a sad story because basically his dad had a belief that God had healed him, so he refused to stay in the iron lung and basically came out and he died. It's just a terrible story, but Philip Yancey grew up in a really fundamentalist, harsh church with no dad. And he said this, he said, "Having no father created a hole in my universe, something like a black hole, a powerful unseen force that disturbs everything around it. Though he's hardly even a real person to me, more of a myth, his life shadowed mine. His absence felt like a presence. He looks just like his daddy," women would say, as they tamped down a cowlick on my head. "He's got that same head of curls. They referred to him as your daddy, but I never called him anything. He died before I could talk." And that's Philip Yancey. And what he says happened to him is he met a doctor called Paul Brand. And the doctor sort of befriended the family, and he became a bit of a father figure for Philip Yancey. And he said that when he met a father figure in human life, he said it gave him a template for understanding what Father was for the first time, because he'd been trying to relate to God without any template at all. And I think these templates are really often in place. So here's 3 that I have seen many times in doing ministry for 35 years, of meeting up with people and unpacking how we function and what is often wrong. And here's 3 that are just really, really common. Many people have had distant fathers. It's a template. Distance is, it's not like abusive necessarily. It might be distracted. It might be really busy. It might be not very good at relating to people. It might be an absence. It might be that their father died, like Philip Yancey. But that template is in place, this kind of sense of distance. So when you think of father, it's kind of like, it's a bit distant. And the problem with that, of course, is that when you don't have someone to depend on in your kind of, as you're forming as a person, it makes us really self-sufficient. It can do. That's one reaction that people have without a father, is they try and find ways of being self-sufficient, managing without. So that's one of the effects of that template. Second one, unpredictable. Again, really not at all uncommon. The sort of temper, the mood swings. Some people who say had something like an alcoholic father, the thing they most talk about is unpredictability, because fathers are supposed to be predictable, so that you can rely on them. And it makes you hard to trust. That's the effect of unpredictable fathers, is they're hard to trust. It's a template, unpredictable. And finally, the other one that I think is really common is critical. You're not quite enough for that kind of father. And they're a bit disappointed, and a bit hard, a bit judgy. And of course that makes you feel a bit unworthy if you're around that kind of father. So what's your father template? Maybe that you had a brilliant father, and I know lots of people do. Sometimes we have amazing fathers, but they're not totally whole, like no one is. And so sometimes they leak a little bit, some characteristics. We all do as parents, I do as a mother, leak characteristics that aren't whole, and they form a template for understanding fathering and mothering for us. And there's a knock-on effect. It's not just we sort of have that idea and then it's just sort of held in suspension in our brain. We become self-sufficient, we find it hard to trust, and we have this lingering sense of being unworthy. Those are the templates. They're often there without us even knowing about it. And again, it might not have come from an abusive place. It might just have come from something that is just a bit lacking in some way or another. But Jesus is about dismantling the barriers to prayer and to God. That's what he's up to. And so he's painting this picture of a father that's deliberately provocative to the people who are listening to him. He wants to overturn their ideas of what God is really like. And he wants, what kind of God are you praying to when you pray? It's really interesting what you were saying, Chris, about just engaging with that kind of your emotional sort of sense of, is God in the emotions? Because that's such an un-Jewish way, or even also an un-Greek worldview, which was the other major worldview at the time, was God's unemotional. He's the immovable mover. He himself is unmoved by anything. But the idea of inviting God into your emotional life is alien. But actually Jesus is saying no. The opposite is the case. And so here is what God is like as a father compared to those. So where human fathers can be distant, God is protective, present. He is close. He protects by instinct. Do you feel like that? God's protecting you. He wants to. He has that attitude towards you. Where human fathers might be unpredictable, and we all are a bit, God is empowering, because unpredictability is disempowering. It makes you feel like, I can't trust anyone. It reduces you into this kind of minimal sense. But God wants to empower you as a person. That's the kind of father he is. He's not trying to keep the glory for himself. He loves to share the glory. He wants you to feel glorious in your life. That's such a lovely thing he was saying. And where human fathers might be critical or undermining, even not on purpose, they might not mean to at all, but to you it might feel they're a bit judgy. Actually, God the Father is prophetic. He's a prophetic voice. Prophetic means to bring out the the goodness, to see the goodness in you when no one else can see it, and cast your future in the light of it. That's what God is like when he speaks over your life. He's not trying to just flatter you, he's trying to draw you up into the best person that you can possibly be. And often it's far better than you thought. So whereas you might be thinking that those sort of thoughts come, actually God's dreams and visions for your life far more than yours are, way more. Like any really good dad, your dreams for your children are huge, and the challenge is to live up to them. So those 3 templates, I just think actually take them away and have a little think this week. What were the templates of what your parenting was like, and are you bringing that into your relationship with God and just stifling it? So second thing is, he's a merciful father. It's a surprise to us in the story, isn't it? We just think, actually, gosh, that son, he kind of, how rude, to just come and say, I want all the money you're going to give me when you die. I want it now because I want to go off and party. There's another slide, I think. The merciful father. And actually he meets this kind of, that presumptuous rudeness with this kind of mercy. And it's a bit shocking because remember, the Jews don't even say the name of God. Don't say it out loud because you're so unholy, you're so not right with God that you can't even say his name. And here's a God who is merciful. And actually, one of the things that people often accuse Christians of, or the God of the Christians, is not being very merciful, being a bit judgy. Christians known for being a bit judgy. But in this story, the most judgy person is the older son. The older son looks at all this mess. He judges the son for being like that. He judges the father, who is God, for being like that. And there he is, thinking he's a bit holier than thou. And, actually I just think, it's obvious that we're supposed to be that we're the older son. That we're, for many of us we might feel a prodigal, but for some of us might feel, well, we're in there too, we're in this story. And the reality is that we often paint God as judgy, or we think he's judging us, but we're so judgmental. Who's not felt a bit offended or outraged by something someone's done, who's not felt like they don't quite deserve the mercy of God? But because God is more merciful than you. He is. So take a situation where you think, why do Christians have to say that sort of thing about that group of people? And why do they have to be so judgmental? And you feel like, in that position, you feel like you're more merciful. And if it was you, then you would give a little bit more grace. Well, God is more gracious than you. He is more merciful than you. You didn't invent mercy. His mercy is broader and wider and more costly. Actually, God knows the cost of mercy because he sent Jesus to pay the price for his mercy. So he is the one who knows about mercy. And thirdly, he's a generous father. And I just love the way he says to this irritating older son, everything I have is yours. You superior person who thinks you've done everything right with your mean spirit. Everything I have is yours. Nothing's been withdrawn from the older son. And he's generous to this younger son. And these templates need dismantling of what we expect when we come in prayer to God. And at the end of this little passage, I just finish with this little slide, is Jesus returns to the idea of what it's like to have a father, a daddy, when you pray. And he says these famous words: ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? If he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? He's coming back to this. What he's saying there, he's dismantling our fears. We all carry fears around unanswered prayer. All of us do. Fears and disappointments and uncertainties when we come to God in prayer, and Jesus is naming them. You think God's going to give you a stone or a scorpion or a snake. That's the problem. you're not sure he's going to give you bread or any good gift. And Jesus is naming the fears because he's unflinching in doing that. It's what he does all the time. Most of his stories are about naming our fears, saying them out loud, and actually saying, no, it's not like that. I just finished with just a thought. A few weeks ago, I went to Rob and Pam Scott Cook's retirement do, which was an amazing do. And then it was 550 people there from all over their life and history. And it was just incredible. People telling stories of this amazing couple, Rob and Pam Scott Cook. They're 75 and 79, finally retiring. And many people would credit Rob's faithfulness in prayer being the kind of hallmark of their life. I mean, he prays for all of you, for example. If you're on the Facebook group, so get on the Facebook group, you will be being prayed for regularly, every week, by Rob Scott Cook, because he feels called to a life of prayer. Somehow he's broken through into this, he's broken away from all the templates, and he prays for 3 or 4 hours a day. That is his life. He feels called to do that. And I know he prays for me every single day, and he has done since he started praying for us 18, 19 years ago. He prays for our kids. He prays for all of you. And he showed this picture of, in a sermon on prayer once a few years ago, of a newspaper cutting of Tony Blair, who became Prime Minister 26 years ago in England and in the UK. And he, on that day, Rob committed to praying for him. And what he did was he cut out the newspaper cutting, and every day he gets it out. Still, 26 years later, prays for him every day. And it's a really moth-eaten old bit of paper. And the middle of the piece of paper, I've seen it, he showed it to me, is white, where he's laid hands on this picture of Tony Blair. And he's prayed for him every single day. He prays for the Queen every day. He prays for so many people, it takes him 3 or 4 hours. And when situations demand it in the world and things crop up, Pam, his wife, says he will stay praying into the night. Because somehow he's learned that prayer is not just a thing of just bringing a list of things to God. So I want to ask you really, what kind of prayer life you're aiming at? What kind of legacy of prayer are you aiming at? What do you want to have prayed like when you get to the end of your life? Do you want to be able to say, I have seen the faithfulness of God? Do you want to get away from the lists and all the, yeah, but he didn't say this and he didn't do that? Because the thing that's really clear from Rob and Pam's life stories was that that wasn't about lists. There were many, many, many unanswered prayers in their lives. Many, more than they could count. But the story of their life, of praying for 50 years together, was a timeline of persistence and faithfulness that added up to a relationship, not a list of answered prayers or miracles, though there have been many. And so there's, I think, a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a refresh to maybe for some of us, just to come back to God and to recognise when Jesus said, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, it wasn't just a kind of a good opening line. For one thing, it's our Father. When you pray to God, do you ever say that? When you're on your own, in your room, you're praying, Our Father. Because unconsciously, something happens and moves us away from individualism. My Father, this is what I want today. You're part of a community. It's a global, incredible community. It's ancient and stretches back 2,000 years. Our Father in heaven. And you're invited into a very uncomplicated relationship. And Martin Luther, the great reformer, just last thought, he believed that the address, Our Father, was Jesus very deliberately saying, don't just plunge straight into talking to God, but first recollect who you are, your situation, and your standing in Christ before you proceed in to pray. So what he's saying is that just before you pray, pause. Our Father. What does it mean for God to be your Father? It means Jesus died, paid a price for you to be part of a family, and he's a Father. He's good, he's merciful, he's not distant, he's not judging, he's generous. Pause, and then go in. So that's just something to take away this week, really. I wondered if we should pray the Lord's Prayer. And I don't know if you know it all. You know, it's not people, we don't say it so much these days, do we? And I haven't got it written out, but we'll just say it in the very traditional way. But why don't we just close our eyes and just pause for a minute and just, on that first line, before we actually say it, think of what Jesus was doing, dismantling all those templates and ways of thinking about God. And the idea of the holiness making him unapproachable. Our own experiences of fathering, and just pause. Our Father. What does it mean? And let's pray the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Everyone. Yes.
Well done, Vicar.
Thanks. You got me all quiet finally.
Seems like a good place to end on with a prayer. So, yeah, that's it. And said next week, last week here, everyone. Yeah. See you then. Yes.
And one very quick. If someone is, so I had a picture of a knight in chessboard, and this thing of like some people